everybody, this is Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to, let's see, this is Discovery Session 4. Joining me as always is Dave Miller. Say hi, Dave.
Hello, everyone.
So today what we're going to be doing is working on Lesson 4, the Oracle of the Self. I'll tell you a little story about the Oracle of the Self and where that name comes from a little bit later in the program. But what I want to do in today's lesson is show you how to put all these pieces together of what we've covered so far, and then show you how to move this into an actual use of the change grid. Now, before I get into this in detail, I just want to remind everybody that when you are using the tension management system, the ChangeWorks coaching system, with a client, you could be doing it completely conversationally. You could be doing it on a napkin. You could do it with a paper and pencil little interactive tool we put together years and years ago. You could do it using the Oracle of the Self. I'll be showing you in just a short while. Or you could be doing it using a lot more sophisticated capabilities of the online system that all of you are eligible to use. The actual instructions on how to use the online system is going to be in a separate video, mostly because that falls into the category of resource development rather than core competencies. And so we like to keep the education around core competencies very clean, very clear, and then the stuff that falls more into the resource development, we do that as a little side lesson. So with that, let's do a quick review of the ChangeWorks system. Now, the ChangeWorks system actually begins by walking the path of self-discovery, and we covered this in the last lesson that we went through. And so you are going to begin by reminding yourself to practice the caring art of detachment, so the art of caring detachment. We are there to help the client to walk their own path of self-discovery, to find their own wisdom within. We do that by reminding ourselves that we need to remain separate from whatever the client is experiencing it. So while we might be leading them, facilitating it, supporting them as they do their own personal development, we always want to remind ourselves that they are walking the path, their own path. On that path, we're going to ask them to describe the current situation. This tends to be very spontaneous. You say, so how are things going? What would you like to work on? What brings you to the decision to have coaching? So, something along that line, just to get things going. All of you have plenty of education in how to ask good, solid questions, so we won't spend a lot of time reminding you about some of those basic skills. The point is, we need to understand the current situation in whatever detail is necessary for both you and the client to kind of know what the starting point is. Where are we at right now? After you know the starting point, the next thing to move on to, again, is the desired situation. What do you want? What does that look like, sound like, feel like? Why is that important to you? And one of the things that we shared with you is a little tool that you can use to do thorough development of whatever that desired outcome happens to be. So as you learned in Lesson 1, the goal of every change is to gain or maintain control over whatever aspect of the individual's life you happen to be exploring with them. And there are 4 aspects of control, or 4 different ways of looking at a desired outcome, so that you can get a complete picture and you can determine early on whether or not the goal is something that a person actually wants to pursue. So, as a reminder, as far as whatever that situation is concerned, there are things that the client would like to gain. So, gaining is about having something you don't currently have, or having more of something that you currently have and you want even more of. So what do you want to gain as a result of making whatever this change happens to be? Sometimes there are things a person would like to get rid of, to shed, to lose. It's just no longer a fitting, appropriate, beneficial thing for them to have in their reality. They'd like to get rid of that. But simultaneously, while they want to gain things and they may very well want to lose some things, there is also a set of things they don't want to gain. As we said, change always involves an exchange of control. It requires the redistribution of resources or attention, energy, whatever. And so we want the person to describe that desired situation both in very positive terms about what they want to gain and what they don't want anymore, and what they don't want to gain, what they don't want to invite into their reality. It may very well be the case that as the client starts to explore what they don't want to gain, they may look at the change and say, you know, as much as I might like this desired outcome, the truth is that the price tag of that desired outcome is greater than I care to pay now. Maybe it's a temporary situation, or ever, depending on what it may be. And when we did this in lesson 1, we went into some examples of this in great detail for you to really understand what we're talking about there. There are also things people don't want to lose. Very often that happens to be money. So people would love to do all kinds of things, but they don't want to part with the cash that's required, or whatever the other resource or asset may be. So this is a very powerful tool for helping the person get great clarity around the full scope, all 4 aspects of how control is going to play out as that change gets considered and pursued. So that's a way to get more detail to that green step. After you understand the desired situation and the client is comfortable moving forward with it, the next thing we want to look at is the obstacles. Now, again, when we look at obstacles, we're not doing something negative. We're not being negative. What we are saying is that we live in a real world, and in a real world, as we start to embark upon any kind of journey, there are things we may encounter that we can predict, or we can determine how likely we are to stumble across wherever the obstacle may be, so that we can think about it and we can prepare ourselves in advance to avoid it altogether, to work our way around it in the event we do encounter it, just to be, you know, to be forewarned is to be forearmed. So this is the obstacles. Now, we talked about during the lesson we did on the path of self-discovery, this in more detail, but we said those obstacles, particularly when it comes to human performance, tend to fall into 4 categories. And so we looked at the 4 root causes of poor performance or human struggle and failure, and those were unaware, unable, unwilling, and unsuitable. So maybe what the obstacle is simply a matter of awareness. And if we can help the client to learn what they need to learn or become aware of what they aren't aware of, then great. That may very well eliminate the obstacle and they can move confidently forward. Perhaps it's an ability issue. There is some sort of skill that they are lacking. And if we can help them to develop that skill, to develop more experience using a skill so they have confidence around it, maybe that takes care of it. Perhaps it's a willingness issue. Maybe the bottom line truth is that they just don't want to do it. So yeah, they want the desired outcome, but they simply do not want to do the work that's required. That's okay, but obviously that's going to very powerfully interfere with their forward movement. And so willingness, maybe we need to help the person find their reason why. Maybe we need to explore with them what the hesitation might be about so that they can make a very informed decision around that. But maybe it's a willingness issue. And the last one is about suitability. Maybe it doesn't match. And as they start to really think about that goal and why they aren't at that goal already, they realize because it's never really truly been something that they wanted. Perhaps it's been something that other people wanted for them and kind of imposed it on their reality. So it's a suitability issue, a mismatch between the client and whatever it is this desired outcome happens to be. So those tend to be the 4 obstacles, categories of obstacles that we do encounter. If there's a missing resource, that's going to be an ability issue. And by the way, as I said last time around, if the client is unaware, unable, or it's an issue of suitability, let us not be surprised to find out that they're also unwilling. But the unwillingness is not the primary obstacle. It is a secondary obstacle, because a primary obstacle of awareness, ability, or suitability is what's really in the way. And so hopefully, and again, you guys can revisit lesson 3 to get this locked in greater detail, but these are the kinds of things we'd like to explore explore with a client in the name of obstacle identification. And again, I think it bears repeating that I shared with all of you that when people ask me what I do, I always say I help people to identify and eliminate the obstacles that stand between where they are and where they want to go. I genuinely, fervently believe that if there were no obstacles, there is no reason why every person would not be at their desired situation right now. If the truth is they are not at their desired situation, then there must be something or more than one thing, some obstacle or set of obstacles, real or imagined, that are in their way. And until we can help them to identify, clarify, validate, and deal with whatever those obstacles may be, the chances of them reaching their desired outcome are greatly compromised, perhaps rendered impossible. So think of ourselves in many ways as being a dragon slayer. And the problem with the career of being a dragon slayer is that a village doesn't need you if there's no dragon. So this is really it. When people go like, what are you really for? What are you going to do? What I'm going to help my clients do is to certainly get clarity around their desired situation, get clarity around their current situation for that matter. But once we have all that clarity and we have that, level of interest and commitment, now the real work begins. And now the real work is, okay, as you pursue whatever that desired outcome happens to be, what do you see right now as something that's been in your way up until now? What has stopped you from reaching that goal up to now? That's obstacle identification. What do you anticipate might be an issue as you pursue this? So obstacle identification, or as we described it last time around, logical negative assessment. So after we know whatever those obstacles happen to be, then we can look at the solution, start coming up with strategies and approaches, ideas that can help them to get to their desired outcome. And then that last little step, the red step, is all about asking the person to make some sort of an emotional connection with whatever the solution happens to be, an emotional connection with achieving the desired outcome. And from that emotional connection, we hope to have commitment, and not only commitment, but a real passion to pursue the whatever that solution happens to be, and get closer and closer to whatever that desired outcome. So that's walking the path of self-discovery. Now, as we walk that path of self-discovery, we talked about activity identification. So we said as people just start talking about their desired situation, as they talk about their current situation, as they talk about obstacles and solutions, they are coming up with all sorts of things that are happening or need to happen or will be a step of a solution. These all fall into the category of activities, things that need to be done, things that we're considering doing that give rise to how we can best serve them as a coach, what kind of support and guidance we might be able to give them. And so activities were simple tasks on your to-do list, big goals and small goals you have for yourself. Perhaps it's about relationships you have with other people or different situations or options you'd like to look at. The only really critical thing about an activity is that because it is something someone does, we need a verb. And today we'll talk a little bit about how you go about choosing the most powerful verb, the most accurate verb, to be of greatest value to the client. We'll also talk about the value of being very specific versus leaving things very general. Dave, anyone have any questions, comments? Right, so John, go ahead and share the question. And
well, you were mentioning that somewhere in this process we're going through the activity. So what step is that?
Oh, it's throughout the entire path of self-discovery. We'll demonstrate just a short while, but it's happening all the time. And because it's happening all the time, it is something that we can capture and work with purely conversationally. But oftentimes I think this is where the coach might actually start taking some notes. And so just jotting down just a couple of little notes so things are locked in for future discussion, or locked in as a bit of a reminder for the client. So this is really, capturing activities is just about taking notes. And whether we're taking those notes purely in our mind, staying in the conversation, whether we're actually physically writing them down, or as you'll see in a short while, if we're actually populating the activity list on the Oracle of the Self. It's all just an attempt to capture. So it happens all the time. During the white step, they're telling us about things happening in their current situation. So maybe there's some activities there that we'll capture. When they talk about their desired situation, obviously every aspect of their desired situation could be stated as a goal or part of a goal. And so that becomes an activity. When we start talking about each of the obstacles, obviously then avoiding an obstacle, bypassing an obstacle, eliminating an obstacle, these all end up becoming very explorable activities. And most definitely the action plan is probably nothing but activities. And so I think that we have far more opportunities to elicit activities than one would imagine going into it. And at a certain point, the real skill is about extracting mission critical activities. So of all these activities that get talked about and spontaneously shared, which are the ones that you really want to do a deeper dive into? Which ones are really going to be instrumental in helping that person to move toward whatever their desired outcome happens to be? So the answer to the question is that this happens from hello all the way through the end of the process. And it's also a living thing. So even as we start to work with a client on implementing their strategies and checking in with them about progress, more activities could certainly come up. And some will be retired because they're completed. Next steps will appear. And so this whole idea about activity identification is a very living, breathing, real sort of thing.
We have another question to you as well.
Yes.
From David. He said, Edward de Bono in his Six Thinking Hats suggests we go to feelings and intuitions, which is the red hat, after what he calls objectives, which is the white hat, which we're calling the current situation.
Sure.
As coaches, we often want to spend some time up front understanding how clients are feeling about their current situation before moving to their desired state or solution.
Yes.
I'm curious what you think about this and what your rationale is for putting feelings and intuitions at the end of the path.
Yeah, so this is how I put it. And those of you who have not read my article on the merging of brilliance, you will certainly find me talking about Edward de Bono's work. And one of the things, the whole point of the merging of brilliance is that if we stumble across any model that's standing all by itself, seems to make some good sense and have some real usefulness, some real merit, we should be able to integrate it quite effortlessly into everything else that makes sense and has merit when they're standing all alone. So the whole idea about merging brilliance is to attempt to say, if we took all this brilliance coming from all these different sources over all these years and blended them all together, we should come up with a really solid understanding of this amazing creature called a human and how to work with that human most effectively. So as I integrated Edward de Bono's concepts of six thinking hats in with everything else that I had learned about, over 400 different models, certain, I'll say, improvements, enhancements came forward, because again, any one individual model is really great, but it becomes even greater when other models are integrated with it. So here is the short answer to that very long setup, and that is that I genuinely believe that someone's feelings are part of their current situation. So when I'm asking someone to tell me what's going on right now, I expect to hear some sort of concrete factoids about whatever is going on, but their feelings are a very valid, integrated, integral part of that current situation as well. Likewise, when I ask someone to talk about their desired situation also contains what they'd like to feel, or all those other red hat sorts of things. So Edward de Bono really does describe the red hat more as about a feeling, an emotion that's connected with it. But other models who have looked at the different modes that the brain goes into, or thought processes that someone goes into, would also include in their instinct, intuition, gut level feelings, predictions. It becomes more of a collection of all of those mystical, magical thought processes outside of logic. So, in fact, creativity falls into the category of red step sometimes. So, that's the answer there. So the model, as he presented it, is a giant step in the right direction that ends up getting further enhanced when it gets integrated with other models. Similarly, if we move on to the what he would call the black hat, the black step, the obstacles, certainly someone's feelings could serve as an obstacle. So remember I said that when we are looking at obstacles, in fact, the statement I said is that if you're not where you want to be right now, it is because there is some obstacle or set of obstacles, real or imagined, that are in your way. So it may very well be that the biggest obstacle to someone moving forward is a feeling that they have. Perhaps that's an emotion, perhaps that's a hunch, some form of intuition, some sort of psychic knowing that something isn't going to work out, or some ominous thing threatens their future. When someone starts talking about the steps of the solution, one step of that solution may very well be helping the person to work with their state of mind. So maybe that's about having someone do positive affirmations, visualizations, etc. If I was going to be strict about that, that is an internal process. That might also be something that falls in that category of red. So I have always operated with the belief that red is factored in. Feelings, hunches, instincts, intuitions are filtered and blended with every one of these seemingly logical steps as well. White is very concrete. Well, no, my feelings are also a very valid, real part of my current situation. So those things are going to come up throughout. But at the end of the sequence, this is where I want for a moment the spotlight to be put on the red step. The spotlight to be put on what is it that you are actually feeling, not feeling in general, not feeling about your current situation, your desired situation. What are you feeling about what we've just done here, what you've just done? So again, the path of self-discovery is designed to help an individual discover the wisdom within. And I would like them to stop for a moment and realize that wisdom, and then answer the questions. Well, how does that feel to you? What do you predict will happen now? What are your instincts, intuitions, gut level feelings, etc., about what we've done here, about what you're committing to, about what you're going to embark upon, about the chances of those obstacles being eliminated and you reaching that particular goal. So we put it at the end because I believe it's the cherry on the top of the sundae. It is the thing that takes a logical process and mobilizes the energy, the passion, the dedication, the commitment to following through and making it really happen. So I guess that's my answer. So David, you're welcome to unmute yourself if you've got anything you'd like to share. Yeah.
I love your explanation, T. You had me at intuition and feelings exist at every place along the path. Thank you.
You're welcome. In fact, and you guys, we all work with lots of various clients, but most of the time I kind of feel like it is that instinct and intuition that is really running the show. And we pause occasionally to look at logical, concrete stuff. And I'm okay with that because I sort of believe that human capabilities and we all know this, we've barely scratched the surface of what our potential really is. It may very well be that what we are describing as instinct and intuition and predictions and all these gut level feelings are actually logic flying at a pace so fast, so automatically, that we can't really say, I thought it through, because it happened in a micro millisecond, but nevertheless, there it is. So I like to think that it is something that is constantly in operation. It is constantly factored in, but we'd like to put a spotlight on it just at the end, so we really get them to look at the work they just did. Again, discovering that wisdom within. And I love it when a client realizes that they have figured out whatever their own situation happens to be. Did they need a little guidance? Okay, that's fine. Do they need to be pointed in the direction of some resources? Yeah, well, that's great. That's really wonderful. So we've done, but the work has really been done by the client, and I'd like them to have a moment to really feel proud of themselves. I think all of you know that one of the ways that we apply tension management to our work is in a program called Pride-Based Leadership, and it can be a program that's directed towards self or directed towards family, directed towards employees and larger constituencies. But it's all about this feeling of pride as the fuel that powers the human enterprise, and it gives us that desire to keep going higher and higher, and to greater and greater things. So that's the place of the red. Okay, any other questions, Dave? Okay, Anne has a question. Is there a point at which there are too many activities, gets overwhelmed, sends them into stress? I can imagine having, well, you know, certainly the number of activities that we're looking at, we need to be a bit sensitive to that. Particularly if we're going to be using the change grid as an instrument. Again, we'll talk about the details of that on a separate call. But conversationally, people may very well come up with dozens, if not hundreds, of different activities get rattled all off. That's where the real skill that we need to possess as coaches, and we need our clients to develop for themselves, is about identifying what are the mission critical activities. So what are the most powerful activities for us to explore in greater detail that are most likely to help us move to the desired outcome we're looking for. Okay, so now as someone starts to talk about activities and you choose an activity you consider to be mission critical, purely conversationally, there are 3 quick assessments I'd like you to ask the person to make. And do this very conversationally. Just say, okay, great, there's the mission critical activity. So the activity is, and state the activity. How do you rate your ability to make that activity turn out the way you want it to? And now we show a little scale of 0 to 12, which becomes very important if you're actually using the instrument. But conversationally, they'll say things like, well, you know, I really have no idea how to do that. Or they'll say, you know, I've got some ability. I've done it before. I've successfully completed it a couple of times. Or, oh, I'm an absolute master of this. I could do it in my sleep. So they're saying things that are giving you an indicator about where they happen to be on the ability scale. And conversationally, I don't really need them to give me a numerical rating, because understanding their words helps me to picture that change grid we showed you in lesson 2. And you know where they are on the change grid, and that's going to give you a great insight into try and help them, and I'll demonstrate that in just a second. We also want them to rate their level of challenge, and again, conversation, you're saying, all right, well, how challenging or how difficult do you think that that may end up being for you? Again, now this is more of what's going on in the right brain. In fact, these hunches, instincts, intuitions, predictions are probably going to come into someone's thought process as they start to share what they think the challenge is going to be. They might go like, well, I think it's going to be easy. It's a no-brainer. It's effortless. Or they might say, oh, you know, that'll be a little bit of work. Or they might say, that's going to be a real test. Or, oh my gosh, there's no way, no possible way. And so just in conversation, they're going to give us an indicator about where their level of challenge happens to be. They don't need to say 0 to 12. That becomes important if you're using the instrument, but conversationally, I still want an answer to this. Now again, if you think about the change grid, and let's see if I can find a diagram for you. Yeah, here we go. I'll use this one. So if the person says to you, well, you know, as far as that particular activity is concerned, I think my ability is really pretty solid, but you know what? It's going to be challenging too. Okay, pretty solid ability. Those words feel like a moderately high level of ability. And they go, it's going to be pretty challenging. That feels like a moderately high level of challenge. So where that perceived ability and perceived challenge kind of meet puts me right here. And those of you who remember what the change grid looks like, I'll be reminding you in a couple of minutes, that's in power. And we know a lot about power. So we know that when someone is in a situation where they view their ability and that challenge as being in balance, and they believe their ability is strong, even though the challenge is also up there a little bit, this is a place where they go like, I can do that. It's almost like it's a time to prove something. A test is underway, and there's confidence that's there. The person is engaging their logical thought processes. So all those things we learned about power are going to hold true. And without getting into the grand details now, as we start to work with the client, we're going to share that with them. We're going to say, well, based on what you just told me then, here's some things that I'd be curious to know if you're feeling. So tell me a little bit about your confidence around this activity. Don't be at all surprised when they say, oh yeah, I think I can do that. Is this something that you think is going to happen automatically? Nope, this is really going to put me to the test. How do you feel about that test, about your likelihood of success, etc.? So I'm actually asking them questions to help them validate what we already know happens when someone is in power. It also helps us to double check. Are there ratings that they gave themselves and the way they're actually feeling? Do these align with one another? Later in your training, we'll talk about what you do when they don't. So that's the essence of it. Now, that other scale we looked at is importance. And later on, you'll find out there's actually a fourth dimension that we're going to look at. But importance is just about how the deadline, the priority, the preferences. What is it about this particular activity that deserves their attention? What are the merits of it that end up making it worthwhile? I'm trying to use every word but important that I can think of, but it's all about importance. Now, here's the thing about importance. Far more often than not, in fact, I would be hard-pressed to come up with an exception if the client is allowed to spontaneously share whatever it is they'd like to work on. In my experience, it ends up being important enough. So I rarely feel the need to ask them to tell me how important it is. I mean, you might do it just to check in or understand how different desired outcomes might stack up against one another in terms of priority with them. But, you know, if they brought it up, it's going to be important enough. If they continue a dialogue around it, they're giving me evidence they consider this important enough. So I don't necessarily need to put a lot of attention on the question of importance if the client is allowed to generate their own activities, their own desired outcomes. I said that so that I could say this. If, on the other hand, the client is talking to you about some sort of a change that they are being told to make or asked to make by somebody else. This happens all the time. And those of you that are doing executive coaching or coaching with up-and-coming leaders, and you're asking what's going on. And quite often the reason why they're experiencing coaching is because we're trying to prepare them to be successful in whatever the new role happens to be. So it is then that we have to be very aware of the importance rating, because that individual who has been assigned a particular task or mandated with a particular responsibility may feel very differently about that activity than the person who assigned it. So if they said, now, by the way, the person who assigned it no doubt considers it to be very important, but the individual, the client, might say, I disagree with that. I just don't think it's important. I think this is kind of a waste of time. In that particular case, I really need to explore this importance dimension so we can talk about whatever this disconnect may be between the importance rating that the person who assigned it bestowed upon it and the client, and help them work with that, because obviously there's something there that that needs to be looked at. So again, importance, if it's self-generated activity lists, self-generated goals, whatever, generally we can assume it's important enough. If it's been imposed upon them, you really need to ask the questions about importance. Questions, comments about that?
No.
All right. So now, also, again, conversationally, I don't need to hear a rating between 0 and 12. You're filling out the change grid, yeah. But in conversation, they're going to give me some sort of word that's going to indicate to me how important they think it is. All right, so now after you get these little ratings, and primarily we're going to be looking at importance, or rather, ability and challenge. We know where they plopped on the change grid, and we already learned about the 5 response states, and very quickly we learned that the different response states are useful to know and useful to share with the client, because it helps them to better understand the emotions that are likely to be encountered and experienced at a particular level of tension, how it affects their reasoning abilities, decision-making abilities, how it impacts their perceived availability of resources and the level of control they have, and ultimately how it's impacting productivity. So again, we talk about productive tension, and some levels of tension lend themselves far more favorably than others to certain behaviors, certain outcomes. So stress, and I'm doing these very quickly, stress is way at the top when perceived challenge is far greater than perceived ability. Moving down grid is power stress. Now the level of ability is starting to improve, and perhaps the perceived level of challenge is starting to come down. In power, there's a balance between perceived ability and perceived challenge. As we move into power apathy, the level of ability now feels as though it is greater than the challenge that the person faces. And finally, we get down to the lowest level of tension, apathy, where perceived ability greatly exceeds the level of challenge the person associates with the activity. So again, if you review your a little reference guide about these key characteristics of each of these levels of productive tension, this ends up being great things to share with the client to help them more thoroughly understand what's going on with them, how they're currently relating to whatever that activity happens to be. Remember, the change grid is intended to answer 4 questions, and it's going to answer these 4 questions whether we are doing it purely conversationally, whether you're doing it as a paper and pencil sort of an experience, or whether you're doing it as a fully deployed instrument. The change grid is going to tell us how ready the person is to do whatever it is that needs to be done, how engaged they are in doing it, because being ready to do it and actually being engaged in doing it are 2 dramatically different things, how likely they are to actually follow through and finish, and what type and level of support they're going to need in order to keep them on track and get to their desired outcome. That 4th one is of critical value to all of us as human development professionals, because we need to know at the activity specific level what type and level of support is this person going to require to get them on track and keep them on track for reaching their desired outcome. So it's almost like that becomes the scope of work that we have with that particular client. Okay. So you also learned about the heart line and the very balance, and you also learned about the 2 thresholds. The top, the yellow line, the threshold of activation, the level of tension at which someone takes immediate definitive action, and the purple line, the threshold of delegation, the level of tension at which someone willingly relinquishes control. So again, I just wanted to give you a review, a reminder of all this. All these things happen purely conversationally, but we're going to take it to the next level. And that next level is with the oracle of the self. Now, I'm going to show you the oracle in just a second, but I want to tell you a little bit of a story about the change grid and how it came to be called the oracle of the self. So when I developed the change grid, this is back in the 1980s. At the time, I was living in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and in Ann Arbor, the home of the University of Michigan, and a whole lot of really cool people and very cool things to do. The New Age community was thriving, and there were all sorts of wonderful opportunities for people to do different sorts of self-help sorts of things, personal development sorts of things. Peer group counseling was all the rage, and people were having rap sessions and chat groups and all kinds of really cool things that were quasi-talk therapy, self-managed, self-directed sorts of things. Certainly there were all kinds of different more physical sorts of things going on. So everything from yoga was really being resurrected, and there was all kinds of different forms of body work and Reiki therapy and energy balancing and all sorts of wonderful, wonderful, wonderful things that were happening. And while this was all going on, I was developing this particular concept of tension management and developing this change grid tool. This is long before any automation was even possible. There wasn't even a personal computer, let alone apps on a mobile phone. So it was just back very, very primitive. And I was at a crossroads. And the crossroads was, I said, okay, do I want to take this concept and use it as a tool to go out there and build a little practice as an independent human development professional working with individuals who were on a path of self-development, personal exploration? Did I want to do that, focus on the individual sort of self-help / new age sort of market that was very ripe and growing at that particular moment in time? Or did I want to take this tool and instead package it and present it as something that would be well received and acted upon by corporate clients? So was I going to try to go into the business world, which would require a whole lot of things to be expressed in very different terms than doing it if I was targeting creating a self-help sort of a business? Well, obviously I decided to go the business route, and I'm very glad that I did. But I shall never forget what was happening at that moment, because I had lots of friends who were working on all these different self-help kinds of things, doing all these groups, and they were doing all kinds of instruments too. So Myers-Briggs and the disc profile and all sorts of wonderful, wonderful things that were available at that time. And so I said, well, hey, give the change grid a little try. So go ahead and walk the path and extract activities and put them down on an activity list and do your little assessments and draw your little change grid, and then look at what the reference guide says and see how this helps you with your personal understanding, with helping others to understand what's going on, etc. And I just gave it to them freely as a gift and said, go and play with this and let me know what you think. And so they came back, and this is what they said to me: we love this. This is really interesting, very eye-opening. People found it very interactive, gave them insight. They gave me all the wonderful feedback that I was certainly thrilled to have. And they said, but we think you should change its name. And I said, well, what's wrong with Change Grid? Because it's a grid and it's all about change. And they said, yeah, but we think you should call it the Oracle of the Self. And I thought, oh my goodness, that'll never fly with a corporate audience, but okay. So the Oracle of the Self, why do you think it should be called the Oracle of the Self? And they said, because a change grid is you talking to you about you. And I went like, I can't deny that. A change grid really is a mirror that is reflecting dialogue that you are having with yourself about yourself at this particular moment in time. Very, very true. A change grid, when it is used at its purest form, serves as an oracle. a way of you being able to see the conversations that you are having with yourself about yourself. Now, even though it serves as an oracle, again, you talking to you about you, sometimes to help you understand what you are actually saying to you about you, it might be good to have a little bit of a guide. Now, back in the early 80s, it had not been called coaching yet. There were lots of other labels people were using, but the whole profession of coaching hadn't really been formalized yet. And although it was starting, it hadn't really reached the level that it certainly has by today. So this is the role. If I can have a client have this oracle of the self experience, and then I use that oracle of the self as a tool to facilitate conversation and dialogue, deeper understanding, I can actually provide the coaching in a more effective, more elegant, impactful sort of way. And so that is why all of you as graduates of this program are enabled to gift to any of your clients, your prospective clients, every member in an audience. If you're doing a presentation, you could give this away on your blog, whatever you want. You are welcome to gift the entire universe with the Oracle of the Self tool. And the tool comes with it a 6-hour webinar program called Mastering Personal Change. And that program teaches them the basic workings of how the Oracle of the Self actually operates, or what we are referring to it as, my personal change grid. So I've often thought about creating a spin-off website called the Oracle of the Self, but I think that calling it the Change Grid is really just fine. So what I'd like to do is just show you that and show you briefly how it gets used. And again, as I do this, just remind you, everything we're talking about can be used very effectively, purely conversationally. But if you do take down the occasional notes, or you'd like to capture the mission critical activities, rather doing that on a napkin or on a piece of paper or even on a nice form that I give you, I would like you to populate it online, or have the client populate it themselves if you've given the Oracle. By the way, you don't necessarily give the client the access immediately. You've probably worked with the client, and as you've worked with the client using the path of self-discovery and using the change grid, you may very well get to a point where you go like, I think that it's time for me to help them help themselves. So let me now transfer some of this knowledge base to them. Let me gift them with this capability. And then we can use this now as the foundation for our ongoing work. So again, you decide to whom you wish to give this and when you wish to give this. And by the way, you don't have to give it to them. You could also sell it to them. So we routinely sell this for $99, including it. And it's theirs for a lifetime. It never changes. So what they would do is go to the ChangeWorks system, and they would log in, and under dashboard, except I already know this, it's going to ask me to log in again because I've been yammering forever. The system automatically logs you out after a certain period of inactivity for security purposes. I've been talking at the same time. Anyway, so they log in, so we would give everyone their own password. By the way, if questions come up, we capture no data about the client whatsoever. All we need to know is their email address so that we can send them their password. And from that point on, it's all done. We don't collect the data. We don't compile the data. It is simply theirs in their account. So there's nothing going on. And there's nothing financial that happens on this website. So there's no credit cards, there's nothing like that at all. If they were to purchase it, that's a different website. After the purchase is completed, then they come to this. And so it's really just their own personal website. No one has any ability to see it. If I don't know your password, because you didn't tell me your password, I have no way of getting to your account. So it's absolutely completely secure. So get rid of stuff. Okay, now you're seeing it. Okay, so sorry about all that. So you would just go to changeworksystem.com, and you would type in your password, username and password. And this is what you end up looking like. Mine says admin because I have administrative access, but for yours, it just wouldn't have that one little thing. Under dashboard, the very first one is my personal change grid. And that's where I could go and change that the Oracle of the Self, but I think that's more of a fun thing. That it doesn't need to be the title. It's my personal change grid. So here's how it all works. You're having a conversation with a client. You hear something worth populating. You just click on Add Activity. And so maybe I'm talking to, I don't know, we have a lot of people that are trying to get themselves into top health. And one of the things people are very much looking into is the ketogenic diet. And so people are talking about losing weight. So what if I said, well, let's put in an activity like lose weight. All right, and I could say to the person, all right, well, how do you rate your ability to do that? And so Dave, you want to be my client for the fun of it? I think you've muted yourself again. Okay.
I'm here. I'm
Thank
here.
you. Thank you. Okay, so you know, be the client for a second so we can just demonstrate this.
Sure.
How do you rate your ability to lose weight? Just look at those two words, lose weight. How do you rate your ability to lose weight?
Well, lose weight. I give myself a 9.
A 9. Okay, so a good solid skill there. How challenging is it to lose weight?
8.
An 8. Okay, interesting. How important is it to lose weight? You be the client.
11.
An 11. Okay, fine. Now there's one other dimension. We talk about 4-dimensional thinking, and this is, in certain situations, a very, very powerful dimension to look at, and in other situations, it's kind of like a little trivial side kind of way to look. But it's size. Every activity that someone performs requires a certain amount of work. And some things take a lot more work than others. So if I ask you to read an email, that's an activity, but as far as size goes, it's tiny. If I ask you to paint the entire interior of your house, you go like, okay, well, that's an activity, but that's big. That's a lot of time and energy and resources. It may or may not, in fact, challenge. It's just big. And so there's a certain capacity we all have to handle work. We can only juggle so many activities at a given moment in time before we get overwhelmed or stretched to the point of breaking. So sometimes size is a very important dimension to look at, and other times not so much. We do have to put an answer in here, though, just for the system to operate. So I'm just going to give it a 6, just to dismiss it as something that I really don't want to look at. You could give it a 0. It really doesn't matter. We're just going to be looking at these other 3 dimensions. Now, right now, if I just want to say lose weight, let's go ahead and view your change grid. And I can be doing this constantly. So right now, Dave is plotting in power when it comes to losing weight. Now, let's do something a little different. I'm going to add an activity. And I'm going to say, lose 10 pounds. We'll leave size at 6 just because that's not the issue right now. Dave, how do you rate your ability to lose 10 pounds?
I would say, well, if we're talking present time, I'd say 10.
Okay, a 10.
Well, actually, no. Sorry, I was thinking the wrong thing. Let's say 7.
A 7. How challenging is it to lose 10 pounds?
Let's go up to a 10 on challenge.
A 10. How important is it to lose 10 pounds?
It's 11.
An 11 still. So now I can ask it to view the change grid, and now we're going to see something. Well, losing 10 pounds creates far more tension for Dave than losing weight in general. I'm going to do it one more time, and this is to illustrate a very important point. Lose, 10 pounds by September 1st. We'll leave size at 6. How do you rate your ability to lose 10 pounds by September 1st?
Since I'm doing the ketogenic diet, you know, I would say, gosh, I feel like making the ability higher than a 7, but that doesn't make sense, does it?
Well, it's because you know you know how keto is going to work. Let's do this.
Make it 100 pounds.
No, let's just go lose 20 pounds by September 1st.
There you go. There you go.
How do you rate your ability to do that?
All right. my ability would be like a 4 for that.
Okay, exactly. How challenging is that?
11.
An 11. How
Not
important?
impossible, but
And
it's probably a 3.
a 3, right? Exactly. Okay, so again, we will then say, let's view the change grid. And now that puts him up in power stress, almost to the edge of stress. Now, I did this because I wanted to illustrate something for you guys. The more specific the activity is, the more useful the plotting happens to be. So for example, if the general concept of losing weight is there, well, Dave says, well, yeah, I can lose weight. That's not a problem at all. But is that what he really wants to do? So if I said, Dave, let's just go ahead, tell me what your actual goal is.
It's probably to lose 10 pounds by September 1st. I think that's pretty good. Yep.
Okay, now September 1st. Let's go ahead. Again, I'm just jotting down some notes. I'll leave size at 6. What's your ability to do that?
I think my ability is an 8 to do that.
Okay. How challenging is it?
I think it's an 8.
Oh, okay. And how important is it?
11.
An 11, all right. So now if I ask it to view the change grid, it's just going to update it. And there it is. Now he's on the brink between power and power stress. Now he's solidly in power. Right along the heart line of power. And so, it's interesting that, and I just wanted to show this to you guys, if the more we can get the client to be very clear about what the desired outcome is and attach some sort of metrics to it, so it gets very specific, the plotting is going to change rather dramatically. So we want to know not how they would plot given 4 different possibilities. Let's instead look at just the one that matters most. And we can go in now, we can selectively delete any of these that really don't apply and just keep the ones that matter most. Now, again, as the client is working with this on their own or you're facilitating it, they might be saying other things like work out every day. Oops, and then they could be doing their own ratings. They could add another activity. So, and they can go in and change their ratings. So it's just a very interactive kind of a thing for someone to use. They can put as many activities as they want on the list, or again, as you're guiding them through the dialogue and you're the one who's actually building the list for them. As many as you want, you can go in, revise the way that you've written it, delete one, add one, whatever it is you really want to do. So it's a very living, breathing sort of thing. So yeah. Are anyone have any questions about the Oracle of the Self, about this change grid?
Not seeing any questions right now.
All right. So what we're going to be doing, obviously, is, and I'm just plotting these just so I can plot it, just see where that turn out. Oh, good. Working out just up in power stress again, where there's a sense of urgency around it. That's all pretty good. So the diet, very logical. The exercise up in power stress. And again, what we would do then is we would use our knowledge around these different levels of tension to help the client have more dialogue around it. Later on in the training, you're going to learn to determine whether or not the activity is in a good position. Is power a good spot for the diet to be? Is power stress a good place for exercise to be? And to help the client to decide if they're happy where they are or if they want to move someplace else in the change grid. Using a very simple set of what we call change grid maneuvers, we can help someone move from anywhere they are on the change grid to anywhere else they'd like to be. And we can do it purely conversationally, or we can do it in a way that's very formal and very deliberate. So, so there you go. So Dave, I see a couple other questions have popped in. So
yes, John's asking, do you recommend having a client actually complete their own personal change grid? And if so, as a starting point to the dialogue or during a dialogue?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And again, we'll talk about this on a separate video. So we keep the core competency stuff very clear. But if you wanted to use the change grid as a tool of intake, so very early on with the client, rather than using the Oracle of the Self or my personal change grid, you would instead use the create a profile feature that you all have access to. This is an individual profile. You would create the activity list You would put in desired ratings where something would ideally plot. You could put in different kinds of questions that you'd like them to answer. And if you're doing big group profiling, demographic questions, there's a very sophisticated level of ChangeWorks deployment that you could use. But I would use this engine to create a starting activity list. Like maybe if I worked with a lot of clients on career development, I would have an activity list of kind of like the key mission critical activities for someone who is doing career development. Or if someone was doing, I work a lot with people that are embarking upon retirement and wondering what does their retirement life look like, or what do they want to do in retirement. And there's a set of kind of questions that I would want someone to start off answering. I would use this engine to do that. And then I could have them fill it out in advance of their very first meeting. I could have them fill it out before they've even decided to become my client. So I could actually use this as an interactive sort of sales tool to help them understand that there really is work to be done, and I would love to help them with that work. So you could position this in many, many different ways. But what I've been showing you up to now is my personal change grid. This is something that at a certain point in time, you would want to give to your client, perhaps you'd want to give to your client, so they could start doing it for themselves. If I'm trying to just do a quick grid for somebody and I don't need to save it and I don't need to deploy it via email and all that, I very often will just use my personal change grid as a way to create a quick live change grid in the moment. So, so that's why I'm showing you this there. This is my personal change grid, also known as the Oracle of the Self, designed for an individual to use for their own personal growth and development. But you can use this as a coach in a facilitated sort of way. A little different than the main change grid tool you also have access to. Other questions, Dave?
No, I don't see any others.
Okay, so then let me go back to my other screen. I just have one more slide I'd like to show you, and then we'll be finished for today. So again, this is the Oracle of the Self. If any of you would like to start inviting people to play with it, just send me an email. All of you should have access to it right now. I think all of you have got active accounts operating right now. We did talk about that four-dimensional thinking. So when we speak next, I'm going to talk about size in a little bit more detail. It becomes meaningful when you're looking at an activity list that has a lot of different activities on it instead of just one activity or different variations on the same activity. So we'll talk about that. So your actual next step is to listen to the discussion session on Lesson 4, the Oracle of the Self, and you'll find that up in the Student Resource Center. So with that, I'll thank you all very much for joining us for Lesson 4. Look forward to talking to you next time. Thanks, everybody. Take care.